But I want to extend my warm welcome to all of you on behalf of NorCal uh, Society for Clinical Gastro Trainee and Education Committee. This is our first webinar as part of a series of webinars this year from 2020-2021 that's focused on career development, trainees, and we'll have a series of talks and lectures, panelists, focus on a variety of topics that will be particularly relevant for trainees. And today, we're very lucky to have a very nice panel, and I'm going to give a little intro about the two sections we have. Today's session will be focused on trying to navigate the job search process during the COVID pandemic era. As part of the first half, we'll have a panelist of 5 sort of recent grads or new junior faculty that have gone through the job search process recently. And each person will share some tips, 2 to 3 minutes of tips about the job search. And then we'll have a 10 to 15 minute Q&A. In the second half, we're really lucky to have 4 of our leaders in GI in the community who are involved in the hiring process across both academic and private practice settings. And they'll be giving their insight and perspective on the job search process from a hiring perspective, which I think will be a very unique aspect to hear about. The logistics of the session, if you have questions, we're going to mute everyone, and please ask that you submit your questions through chat because it'll be a little bit easier to read and direct those questions to the different panelists. With that, I'm going to introduce our first session, or first half, the panel members. We have 5 different faculty. We have Allison Kwong from Stanford, Jennifer Lai from Alameda Health Highland Hospital, Kavita Radhakrishnan from Kaiser, Sarah Lewin from UCSF, and Tim Chen, private practice in San Francisco. So I'm just going to go alphabetical order. And again, we want to hear from you 3 to 4 minutes, about 2 to 3 points on your recent job search experience for fellows that might be looking for jobs in the next 1 to 2 years. Specifically, if you could share some insights that are unique to your practice setting. And so with that, we'll start maybe with Allison, if you're available.
Oh, yeah, I'm never alphabetically first.
By first name. Thanks, Allison.
Last name too. Okay, great. So I am a transplant hepatologist at Stanford, but my other title is an instructor, which is a little bit unique to Stanford kind of title. So if you want to hear more about that, I can talk about that separately. I think what's different about my job, my structure is basically 80% research and 20% clinical. So it's got a huge perks, but also big trade-offs. So a lot of flexibility, but the price, and I get to work with, continue some of the research I did as a fellow. And build on my research program and have time to do that. The big trade-off was a huge pay cut, so I'm not paid quite as much as my peers. And that's just a quirk of the Stanford system. So I think just going through the process, I went through it a couple years ago. I think as many of us are, I was restricted to the Bay Area, although now with the pandemic, not so much. I think the Bay Area is a really challenging place if you are restricted geographically to find a place. I think especially in a niche field like GI, and then more niche like transplant hepatology, the availability is it's just so variable year to year. So you can't really get stuck on saying, I'm going to definitely have this waiting for me when I graduate. And it's very much, the smaller the field is, I think the more narrow it is, and then the more it's based on who you know and your connections, and if they know you already, and who can advocate for you. So those were some of the considerations as I was going through the process.
Perfect. Thanks, Allison. Is Jen Lai, was she able to log on, or is she still trying to log on?
Oh, hi, I'm here
Oh,
by
hey, Jen.
audio. Sorry, I'm having some difficulties connecting to video, still working on it. But,
Oh, no worries. That's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess I can talk a little bit about myself and where I am now.
Yeah,
Would
that'd
that
be perfect.
be helpful?
Yeah, where you
Sure.
are, and sort of one unique thing is you also recently made a switch in practice settings, so it might be interesting to hear about your experience through that process too.
Sure. So I did most of my training in San Francisco at CPMC, where I did my fellowship, and after fellowship, I was a clinical assistant professor at Stanford, and recently heard about an opportunity at Highland, which I did rotate a lot at as a fellow through a colleague, and I think a lot of the fellows right now, especially the third year ones who might be interviewing for jobs, can hopefully this will be helpful for them. But I think looking for a job during the pandemic can be difficult, especially because a lot of the interviews will be done virtually. So, which is very different for all of us, especially when you're feeling out a new place, maybe talking to people you've never met before. It's so that's why I think that relying on your network, whether it's pre-pandemic or post-pandemic, is so important. Just kind of leaning on your mentors, your colleagues, your trusted friends, both for job opportunities and also to kind of help get a candid inside scoop on whether a workplace is the right fit for you. And I think that works both ways for employers when they're vetting out candidates as well. I think at this point in our careers, a lot of us getting this far, some of the CVs tend to look kind of similar, and it's hard to pick the right candidate. So I think that's why your network is so important. I can't emphasize that more. So right now I'm at Highland, which is a county hospital safety net, and really enjoying it so far. There's lots of teaching integrated into it. And a unique part of it is that we rotate on different services on a weekly basis. So inpatient, there's also clinic, endoscopy, there's tons of great pathology, and yeah, it's been great so far. So yeah, happy to answer any specific questions.
Awesome, thanks Jen. Now we'll move over to Kavita, who's at Kaiser. Any tips you have for the fellows?
Thank you. Hi, my name is Kavita. I went to UCSF for residency and fellowship, and I'm a Bay Area native. So like Allison was saying, definitely wanted to stay here when I was looking for a job a couple of years ago. And I just wanted to kind of highlight two pieces of advice that were passed down to me from prior grads that I think, is still pretty relevant, even though obviously COVID is a unique time, I think still relevant. So one, don't be shy, kind of like everyone has said, reach out early, reach out, sometimes more than once. Obviously, don't be annoying about it, but just knowing that there's a lot of movement during any given year, and so reaching out and just kind of stating your interests is helpful. And then to kind of the second point being that jobs are not always one like so transparent or obvious, and so just reaching out can help to have your name kind of come to mind when opportunities arise. And so speaking a little bit more personally about my experience, and so I have an interest in sort of general GI, but also hepatology, and so I was hoping for a job in which I would be able to see all of those patients. And so for me, I applied pretty broadly, both within academics and then also to Kaiser and the Sutter setting as well. And for me, my husband works in the East Bay, he's a urologist. And so my hope was to, somehow find an opportunity there if possible. And I'll say when I first started, really the only job that I came across was at Kaiser Santa Rosa. And so at least geographically, maybe not the best fit, but certainly going up there, meeting people was very, very helpful in learning, about that opportunity. And then over the course of the next few months, I heard about different jobs, San Francisco General, Sutter, PAMF, and Palo Alto, all of which were really, different practice settings, but all, had great possibility and I thought could end up working for us. And then it was not until January where even back then there was a little bit of a, quote unquote hiring freeze. And so not so many opportunities within Kaiser, but because of movement and someone leaving from one site to another, there did arise an opportunity which ultimately grew into a full-time job. And so again, just knowing that it may be unsettling, it's very different than when we apply for residency and fellowship and know that we'll likely end up matching somewhere. Feels a little bit uncomfortable that you don't exactly know what jobs are out there and that you're not sure what might end up being a good fit, but being open-minded, I think, and as Allison had said, not going in with a fixed, predetermined, perfect job, but just knowing that, there'll be opportunities and just take all of them and meet people and talk to people and really learn about what's out there. And that's all
Great.
I have.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. Now we'll move to Sarah Lewin from UCSF.
Great. Well, I'm second and third everything that people have said about the importance of developing a network and also leveraging the network of the faculty that you're working with, because I think that there are a lot of graduates of programs in this area and they go all over the place. And so I think that being able to leverage that network is really important. And I think that was important for my job search as well. I was joking with my friends who've been in the workforce since they were 22. As I was approaching this job search, I was writing a cover letter for the first time in my early 30s. And the thought of, being able to, do something that was so different that I apply, there's an application deadline, and I will know where I'm going to be. It's a very different, path, as Kavitha had alluded to. And so I think that it just acknowledging that there will be angst, there will be anxiety, and there will be unsettling parts of the job search. No matter how certain it seems like you have a job waiting for you, there are always loops that I think that get thrown into the process. And so just expecting that as part of the process and being zen with that and knowing that that's okay, compared to, I think, the much more linear path that we've taken so far in these multiple iterations of training. I think the other thing that's important is, as has been mentioned already, is really reaching out early and reaching out often. And not too often, but I think really trying to be top of mind as things evolve, because people decide to leave and move to a different institution. And so then an opening comes up, or, someone, like in Kavitha's situation, gives up a partway FTE, and then there's a small opportunity that can then potentially grow into a larger opportunity. And so I think that just the more people that you're talking to and getting people to advocate on your behalf, I think is really key to your success in a job search.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. And then we're going to move to Tim. So Tim Chan's a private practice gastroenterologist in SF.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm a private practice general gastroenterologist in San Francisco. I definitely agree with what everyone had said. My situation was probably a little different from the others. I didn't do my fellowship out here. I did do my residency at CPMC, but I'm from Tennessee, so I did my fellowship back home at the University of Tennessee. My wife is from the area, so after fellowship, we were kind of restricted to come back here. So it is kind of difficult, I guess, being far away without as much connections, but I did try to leverage what connections I did have. So I reached out actually to the program or the department chair at CPMC and he's a private practice guy, and he kind of told me, the lay of the land. Most of the people look online, kind of at Sutter, Kaiser, and then he kind of, asked if I was interested in private practice. I didn't go into it looking at private practice because I feel like in fellowship we don't get exposed to private practice. I think my fellowship was pretty traditional. All the staff were, employed, academic physicians. So I kind of fully expected to take an employed position, but, talking with, I guess, our department chair, going on a few interviews in terms of looking at the employed ones and also looking at a couple of private groups, I felt that the, private practice model is something that really appealed to me. And so I ended up joining his group. And I've been in practice for about 16 months now, and it's been great. Couple other things I would recommend is definitely, keep an open mind. Like I said, I wasn't looking at private practice at all until, I just was introduced to it kind of by my partner now. But, I think you'd be surprised by kind of the, I guess, the autonomy and the kind of flexibility that you can have with private practice. So I wouldn't, shut that down right off the bat when you're looking at your, I guess, where you want to be in the coming years.
Awesome. Thanks, Tim. So now we're going to move to some Q&As, and I'm just going to read them and then sort of randomly pick one of the panelists to answer. So there are some questions that were submitted early. So this one is a really good question that I think is particularly relevant during, sort of the COVID era. Someone asked, especially when many of the interviews and such are done virtually, how do you assess whether a practice or an environment is the best fit for you if you're doing these type of virtual visits? And are there specific questions or things you would suggest asking to get a better sense of how this environment would fit? And maybe we'll first jump to maybe Kavita. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sorry. So yeah, really good question, relevant to this time. I'm trying to think through specific questions that might be helpful. And I think for me, I mean, going to different sites and meeting people was actually probably more helpful than actually, being walked through their endoscopy unit or their clinic rooms. And so I think even if you're not physically in at a particular place, making sure that you're meeting with as many, if not all, members of that group or members of that practice, and kind of getting their feel for kind of the group and opportunities, and if you have specific interests, making them heard and trying to identify if it would be a good fit. I think all of that can still be done virtually. Certainly, it always feels a little bit less personal. And less less interactive, obviously, but I think being able to have one-on-one meetings as much as possible, and then possibly just like a group forum like this can at least get you there, get you a sense of kind of how the group interacts. I kind of defer to others though about specific questions I would ask.
Yeah, anyone have any other thoughts? Or I know, Jen, did you interview virtually? I forget, because I remember you're interviewing sort of at the beginnings of this COVID. Was it virtual, and how was that experience?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess my experience was a little bit unique because I already knew everybody at Highland and they kind of knew me already. And when I came to visit, it was right before everything shut down. So that part was a little bit different. But I did do some interviews virtually, like with the chair of medicine, Rachel Baden, and Indu, the program director. So I think things that I would generically ask with just any GI interview is you know, what's the culture here? Does everybody get along? Is there a turnover? Do you anticipate any changes in the next year or 5 years? I think, you know, kind of getting a sense of stability is good. And so these are, you know, kind of the same questions you would ask, you know, in person or not. And I really like Kavita's point on doing a virtual meeting in a group setting, because that is something you wouldn't see in a virtual setting. I've never done a virtual group meeting. And I think, just as I'm kind of thinking of tips as I'm talking about this now, when you're doing a virtual meeting interview, I think you want to treat it as, you know, like a real interview. So show up on time. You know, I think the unique thing is that the background is appropriate. I think that if you know, maybe you're naturally a more quiet or reserved person, and you know, maybe some of that energy might not be able to kind of come through on the visit. So, you know, maybe kind of be aware of that too.
Great.
Yeah.
Another question that came up, and this could be for anybody on the panel. At what point in fellowship do you start looking for jobs, and what is the typical timeline like? And this, you know, this might be especially relevant for COVID.
I can speak to that. I think it's actually just like, I don't know, this is at least how I approach looking for a house or an apartment or, you know, anything along those lines. I think there's actually a certain amount of value in starting your search, not necessarily in earnest, but starting to look to see what's available more publicly early. So you get a sense, okay, what's happening? Are there, you know, positions being posted at PAMF? Are there positions being posted at Kaiser? And just getting a sense about what they're looking for and what the job market looks like. So that way, when it comes time to really kind of move towards making your formal moves and formal applications, that you kind of have a sense about, you know, what's out there and what the sort of historical landscape has been. I think generally, I recall during my job search, there was actually a position at Kaiser San Francisco that posted, I think in May or June. And I think at the end of my second year of fellowship, going into third year, and I believe that they did actually solicit applications for the following year, but ended up filling it earlier. So that was probably a little bit premature to start getting that cover letter together. But certainly by the summer, you know, July or so, I think it's good to be ready to start applying. But I would say on average, people are more often getting their positions secured in the late fall, early winter.
And then sort of on a related note, as you guys are looking for jobs and sort of exploring the landscape, what would you say? I mean, there's no magic number, but how many places do you recommend typically reaching out to or actually applying? And then how many places do you feel like one needs to interview at before finding sort of that ideal job that they're looking for? And this might be a little different than, you know, from an academic versus private practice. So maybe, you know, from an academic setting, maybe Allison, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it depends on how far you're willing to reach.
Yeah.
So my timeline was a little different. I mean, just to go back to the timeline a bit, and mine was a bit different because I had come from Stanford as a fellow, and I was at UCSF for my transplant hepatology fellowship. And I kind of always knew the Stanford job was there. So I had the security of taking my time to go and not to look at different types of jobs. But my timeline was very protracted. So I got my feelers out like Sarah was recommending, but didn't actually formally go look at places until later in the year, almost near like the last half of my transplant fellowship. For academic jobs, I think, I mean, they're obviously in the Bay Area. I mean, I interviewed at Davis too, so there are, you know, the three or main centers for academic jobs, and I think if they're all offering jobs, I think it's good to go look at all of them. And then also good, I mean, I went also out of state too, so I I think it's overwhelming to do as a fellow to do too many interviews. And also a good use of your time to just do the ones that you will take seriously. There were definitely some that are places I maybe didn't, you know, wasn't the best use of my time because I wasn't seriously considering it, but it was still good to go out there to know what was out there. So I think Dr. Valios was saying, were you saying 5 in the chat? I think 5 is a good number, but I don't have any data to back that up.
Yeah, Tim, what from a private practice standpoint, sort of, what was your timeline? And one question that sort of came up is sometimes you interview various places, and obviously you interview across months or so. And what if you get an offer, and a lot of times they ask you to accept or deny the offer within a month, and you're still interviewing at places? Like, how did you guys navigate that?
Yeah. So I guess, I applied, like I said, I applied to everything. I applied to employed positions and private practice positions. So I interviewed at 6 places. I did 3 private groups and then 3 employed spots. And I do think it's important to go to a few so you can kind of compare and contrast kind of like different cultures, different like schedules, their daily lives that, you'll be in to kind of see, how people are practicing and, what your future is going to be like. And, another reason is, in private practice, especially, I feel like practices are very varied. They come in all shapes and sizes. There's big practices, small practices. Some of them, their practice model may not be with, kind of that you agree with in terms of like risk. So I do think it's important to see a few of them. As far as the offers, yeah. So I had that where I was really leaning towards taking on an employed position actually, and I think it was in, I don't know, maybe November, and I was still interviewing. I still had to meet 2 of these private groups, and I really wanted to see them. So I think just being very transparent, that's what I said. I told the recruiter, I was like, hey, thank you, for the offer. But I still have, I still want to see these 2 other places. Is it okay if I, let you know later? And I think after about, I think they said they'll give me 2 weeks. And then after that they'll continue to interview other candidates. And, it's a risk, you have to weigh that yourself. But for me, I really wanted to see what the other options were. So I was okay with that. I said, sure, that's totally fine. You can please continue interviewing and I'll keep you updated. So I think in my opinion, the best way is just to be transparent and just honest with the, I guess, the other, I guess, hat or place.
Great. Thanks, Tim. It looks like we're getting to 6:30. So if no one else on the panel has anything to add, we're going to move on to the second half of the panel. So the second half of the panel, we're very lucky to have an amazing panel of senior faculty and leaders in GI in the Bay Area. And we've asked them to come here and share their honest opinion about what their thoughts and perspectives are on the job hiring process, especially during COVID. And today we have Dr. Valios at Kaiser, Dr. McQuaid from UCSF VA San Francisco, Dr. Stolman, who's a private practice gastroenterologist in Oakland, and Dr. Shah, who's the chief of GI at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. So we're gonna start with Dr. Valios. If you can share some of your thoughts and perspective on how the job hiring process has gone or maybe will go during the COVID pandemic.
I have to give the obligatory, making sure you can hear me. Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Sorry. So the job interview during the pandemic is obviously very interesting because particularly for people looking for a job, there's been a lot of contraction after a lot of expansion. So things were really going like gangbusters and the pandemic hit and then everything started to really just contract and shrink. So I guess my thought though is that at least if we're looking at, kind of what is needed, the fact is that there's still a lot of healthcare that is required. And so I do think that now that we've gotten kind of 6 months in, I do feel that slowly we will be kind of getting out of, which in many places is really a hiring freeze. And the fact is that, there's always a need for good doctors. And the fact is also that, even when jobs are not open, the fact is that jobs can always be open. And so it is really important to still reach out privately. Don't just simply restrict yourself to jobs that exist officially, because often, at least there's some job that can be created for the right person. And it may not be the ideal job, and it may be something for the first year until you can get to something else. But just to continue to think in that way, and you can really, open opportunities that you may not have thought of. So I would just, not just look at what things are officially open.
Great, thank you. Next, let me just double check. I didn't see Dr. McQuaid on. If he is, please stop me, but I'm gonna move on to Dr. Stallman.
Thanks, Robert. So yeah, I'm Neil Stallman. I'm a weird, well, I'm professionally weird certainly, but I was at UCSF. In fact, Fernando was a young buck when I was there years ago, and I know some of you who've grown up in that world. And now I'm out in Oakland in private practice by salary. I get paid by my own practice, but I actually still have a UCSF appointment. I still teach a lot. I did grand rounds at CPMC today, in fact. So those kinds of things. And I guess one of the points I'd make is that these silos that we kind of imply, there's private practice here and there's academic here and there's sort of employed physicians over there. Fernando's an excellent example of blending those things. Fernando, of course, is a Kaiser employee, but is also a notable researcher and teacher and all of those things. I'm a private practice guy. I'm actually doing more, I think, academic work since I've been in private practice. I'm writing guidelines. I was lobbying in DC with Sarah recently. I mean, I do, well, not so recently, but so the silos are not necessarily, for example, going to private practice doesn't mean you're done. I mean, it doesn't have to mean you're done, certainly. It means you can still do a lot of academic work, teaching, research, all of those things. If those things are important to you, I think there's room to cross-train in whatever kind of silo you end up with. Unfortunately, as Fernando said, there was an expansion, and I think there's assuredly a contraction now. We historically have sort of, every time a partner retired, we added one, and we've sort of been at a steady state in our group. This year, we are not losing a partner, but Darby's retiring. One of my partners is retiring, and for the first time in a long time, we're not replacing him. We've made a conscious decision to actually contract a little bit and let our practice get a little bit smaller by attrition, but nonetheless. It's just the nature of what's happened between the pandemic. And it's not just the pandemic, by the way, too. There's other things that are happening. Certainly there's consolidation in the East Bay in salaried worlds. There's Stanford docs and Kaiser docs and Muir docs, and the world of sort of independent private practice is contracting probably in general, even before COVID gave it a hit. And to be clear, your private practices got hit. Everyone got hit, but private practice people earn money on the work they do. They're not salaried, and we shut down our practice for 6 weeks, in fact, and they have taken a hit. So private practice jobs are going to be contracted for the next year. They probably are, and that's actually sad. I get CVs all the time from extraordinarily good people that I'd love to hire, but we're just deciding not to do it. Fernando said something else. I'm basically just giving the Fernando redux here, but Fernando said something about don't only apply for official jobs. And you reminded me of something really important with that. And that is that one of my partners, Susie Ng, who has now changed her name to Susie Cohen, she got married, but Susie was a UCSF fellow. We were not looking for a job. We were clearly at a steady state. And through a friend of a friend, Susie reached out and we found her. And there was a lot that was really great about Susie for us. And we were not looking for a partner at the time, and we made a spot. We figured it out. We basically said, this is the right time and the wrong time, but the right person, and we'll figure that out over time. And we did, and I think Susie and us would both agree it was a good decision, but that was an unexpected hire, and those things absolutely do happen. So I'll stop
Great.
there.
Thanks, Dr. Solomon. So we're going to move to Dr. Shah. He's Chief of GI at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center.
Thanks, Robert. Like most other medical centers, COVID definitely had a significant and unprecedented financial impact on our own medical center. And while we've been very fortunate to avoid furloughs, layoffs, and salary cuts, the drop in the revenue really impacted our ability to be able to hire in the upcoming year. The financial outlook was much worse back in March and April when we pretty much had to shut down all of our elective procedures. But since that point in time, we've really been able to ramp up and get back to our pre-COVID schedules. We find that most people are resuming their medical care, including their endoscopies, and now we actually have a large backlog of procedures. There's this pent-up demand for GI services, but because of the drop in the revenue and the crisis and our county budget deficit, all allocated funding for new positions has essentially been frozen. So we've really had to re-examine our staffing and balance this with our finances. There's, as the other panelists mentioned, there's just a lot of uncertainty with respect to what revenue streams will be like in the near future, and it really makes it hard to plan. If we knew what to expect, I think we could plan around that. And given all of this uncertainty, it makes it very challenging for us to be able to allocate funds and pursue an additional hire. And so for us at Valley, we're holding off and going to wait and see what the situation looks like for the next year. But we genuinely believe the hiring situation will get better, especially at the Valley. The decrease in the physician demand is likely temporary. As we know, we've got a growing and aging patient population. There's a limited supply of newly trained physicians, and there's an aging gastroenterology workforce. And so the work is there, the patient volume will eventually increase. And at the Valley specifically, there's increases in unemployment and patients becoming underinsured. And so we're seeing an increase in the number of patients and lives that we're caring for. And so we hope at the Valley to be able to hire in the upcoming year. And, you know, there's a lot of unknowns, and I think hopefully we've seen the worst of it and have gotten through it, and we really have high hopes for the near future. I think my advice to the fellows that are on the webinar right now is that COVID will definitely have an impact on how you approach your job search, but you're taking the right first step, which is to join this webinar, hear from the experience from recent graduates and from leadership as well. I would recommend that you start your job search now. It's really never too early, especially given the climate. This is your career and your life. Don't leave anything to chance. Find the right practice environment that's going to lead to your happiness and success. Cast a wide net. Utilize all of your resources. Definitely network. Talk to your division chief, your attendings, your mentors. I found when I was going through this process many years ago to also connect with vendors and as well as online resources and recruiters. And sometimes that will help you identify open positions. And just as my colleagues mentioned, really find a way to market yourself and sell yourself in a way that differentiates you from other individuals, because there's always an opportunity to create positions where one might not have existed before. And just remember, as much as you want to find the right first position, the first position that you get doesn't always have to be your last position. So with that in mind, thank you, and good luck on the job search.
Thanks, Dr. Shah. Just leading on that, what you mentioned, and also I think Neil also spoke on this a bit earlier. One question that came up, even in the pre-COVID era, especially in the Bay Area market, sometimes jobs are not very well advertised. It's a very saturated market. And sometimes people know jobs because they train here or they have friends and sort of know the area. I think that this might even be more challenging in the COVID era, where jobs are fewer and maybe not as well advertised. What advice do you guys have for either people in the Bay Area or people that are training elsewhere that want to get a better handle on what jobs are actually available now, or potential jobs that might be available in the next 12 to 18 months?
I can speak from a private practice perspective,
Yeah.
Robert, and you know, there's really not a good clearinghouse for private. I mean, there are headhunters, and some practices do utilize recruiters and things like that. My sense in the Bay Area, which is a smallish community, we've never used that. For example, there's people in town, and we know them, and there's, you know, most of my practice has been UCSF grads, frankly, and who've kind of just come across the Bay, and that's not nepotistic. It's just the people we know kind of locally. So while there are recruiters and they can find you the job in Joplin, Missouri, perhaps that you're looking for, I think if you want to be in the Bay Area, and a number of people have geographic reasons to be where they are, I think you cold email everybody. I think you do. And I get a lot of emails and I answer everyone. Every single fellow who's looking for a job who sends an email, typically to my office manager or to me, they'll find me. I'm not hard to find online. I answer that person. I talk to them about the landscape. I keep their CV on file. So if someone, you know, if, for example, Taft or Robert, when they were looking for someone, not now, but you guys were, I would often be sending you people actually for stuff. And I kind of work with them. So I think, and they may have jobs you don't know about. I think really it seems weird to cold email people, but cold email people. It's not any more complicated than that.
Yeah. Fernando or Nimesh, do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Dr. Stolman. I think a lot of positions are advertised, but you'd be surprised at how many positions are not really advertised. And similar to Dr. Stolman, I get cold emails all the time, and sometimes we may have a position that we either advertise for or an individual may not have seen wherever we might have advertised. And I keep it on file and on my reference. And so when we do have a position open, I'll email them back and say, hey, we have this position, you're interested, let's set up a time to talk and discuss. So I think, you know, definitely network with your colleagues, mentors, attendings, cold email everybody and utilize every resource you have available to determine what positions might be open and those that could become open once you made that connection.
I will add that for Kaiser, for example, there are the official announcements, but also even if you speak to a recruiter, they may even be aware of positions in either, you know, in Northern California or at different sites that are open or about to be open, or people have a certain interest. So again, I think the message is that, I mean, I like Neil's comments, kind of like the right person at the wrong time. I think that is an important strategy as well in terms of opening doors. Finally, even though you kind of cold call, I mean, at some point you may also have like a place or two that you really would like to practice in. And I think that's where you would get a mentor, somebody to, you know, you can probably imagine you probably have 1 or 2 emails that somebody can send on your behalf to say this is a great person and they really love your group. And so use them wisely, but that's also an important thing to kind of get that introduction. Because a lot of this is truly personal. I mean, everyone knows everyone, and at the same time, there's a lot of highly qualified people and really good people as well. And so these little things can kind of help get the edge.
Great. And to play on that theme, some questions have come up. You know, the job search process, you know, goes sort of both ways. You guys are looking for the best candidate, and at the same time, you know, the candidate, him or herself, is also trying to look for the best fit in terms of the right group, the right environment and practice setting. Especially in the COVID era, do you guys have any specific recommendations on how applicants can truly stand out amongst the wealth of really competitive applicants that are looking for, you know, a smaller pool of jobs in the Bay Area?
I think it depends on, again, who you're asking and what they're looking for. I mean, so Fernando at any given time will almost certainly have kind of a niche need, right? He will need someone who can do X, Y, or Z because he's kind of managing a team of things. And it may be random. You may need someone who's very liver interested because that's a sort of a weakness right now at his facility. In private practice, it's different. I mean, we're just really looking for people, you know, we're going to be our family for the next 25 years, and we trust to take care of our patients. And I think it's much less predicated on any specific skill set or any one thing, and much more so on just connection and who they are. And that's tough. I know that that's not a really concrete answer. I'm not helping you very much with that, but I think that's often true.
I would also say that just understanding and kind of tailoring your skills to the group. And again, you're kind of who you are, but different groups may be looking for something different. And so I think that the more you're able to highlight it, so it's just very clear, I think that is one way of kind of standing out among many. Like Neil said, I mean, if there's somebody who's interested in X experience or X skill, and you have that among many others, clearly you're going to want to showcase that if that's kind of what you want to do in your career, whether it's advanced endoscopy or biliary or ERCP skills or research or whatever they may be, or liver.
Right now, it seems like IBD skills are in demand. Fernando, your wife is tweeting all day yesterday about X-teen different available IBG jobs. Everyone's looking for an IBD person right now, it seems. And UMA seems to be the intersection for that. But if you have that skill, shout it out loud, because that seems to be right now in demand. Interesting, it used to be, 10 years ago, it was always ERCPs. Everybody wanted people with ERCPs, and that was sort of a necessary thing to join a practice in my world, because we do that. Now with advanced units everywhere, it's actually less relevant. That has kind of become less important, I think, in a private practice world. In fact, of our 7 partners, only 3 of them do ERCPs now. But IBD is becoming more important. That's a more dominant part of our practice, certainly, and is getting more and more complicated. So I think that skill set you should certainly highlight if you have it.
Yeah, one question that just came up. So the 3 of you represent very unique practice settings that are quite different. And as fellows and trainees are searching for a job, they oftentimes have to find the different factors that they're looking for. And, I think all of us would agree that there's no perfect job. So one question that sort of came up, especially during the COVID era, and this sometimes may be a personal decision, but how much should an individual or an applicant be willing to compromise on their ideal job just to get the foot in the door in the system or in the Bay Area?
Plenty. Today, certainly plenty. And again, you can make jobs. Jobs change. What you think you're getting into is probably not what you're getting into. And like I said, I made my job what I wanted to make it, and it wasn't that. It was a non-academic, sort of non-admin private practice job, and I've changed it. And people in my practice are morphing into different things. So especially when it's super competitive right now, hell yeah, just if you want to be in the Bay Area and you want to be in a private practice, you take a job, and that puts you in the room, and either that job will work out or it won't. It's not that big a deal to change jobs. People do that too. You're not sort of not like a law firm where you're, in 3 years, you're kind of have these golden handcuffs. People change jobs. So I would say, unfortunately, Jessica particularly, I think you have to prioritize what's important to you, but jobs are malleable. Your dreams are perhaps not so malleable. I would prioritize them over the job.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's important to determine what your priorities are, but at the same time be flexible. I remember when I was looking for a job a long time ago, I knew that I had a specific interest in being a clinical educator. I wasn't specifically looking for a county position, but when I interviewed here at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center, I really enjoyed the people that were here and the work that was being done, and looked at it in terms of this is a long-term relationship, that this was a good fit for what I was interested in, and these were good people that I want to work alongside, and the right patient population as well.
And the other thing, remember that in GI in every field, there are times when there's contraction and times when there is expansion. But the fact is that there's always going to be a need for gastroenterologists. So at some point there is a somewhat artificial, thing here, which is that there's not a real contraction in the need for gastroenterologists. There's just a contraction right now in terms of hiring, but the need is definitely there. And so, even between now and the next, 3-4 months, things can open up dramatically. So I'm still optimistic that as people are kind of recovering, kind of seeing where we're going to be, particularly with, when people realize that there is going to be a need for all the delayed care. colon cancer screening, et cetera. These things will start to open up, even though now it may seem a little bit challenging or a little bit stressful.
One question that came up, and we actually have several people on the webinar who've switched jobs within the Bay Area. One question that someone submitted was, do you think, at least from a hiring perspective, the competitive landscape between different practices and different practice settings, how does that affect you at all when considering applicants that are moving from another institution to yours?
I didn't follow that entirely, Robert. I'm sorry.
Oh, they were just wondering, does the competitive landscape between different practices affect your decision to hire or not hire certain applicants?
No, I think most practices are making very inward-looking decisions, not so much, if that's the kind of question, is what's going on. I'm not hiring anyone because I'm worried about the other guy's going to hire them. That's not currently, if that's kind of what we're talking about. No, I think practices are rather insular, and they're a little bit insulated.
And then just to follow up on a question that came up earlier for the first panel, same question that came up. Oftentimes employers or applicants are interviewing, and employers give them a job offer and have a limited, finite time to respond. Now you guys are on the other side giving offers. What is your thought on time frame and applicants' approach to responding to your offers when they themselves are trying to explore other jobs?
I'd say for me, it's mixed and it's evolving. And just a minor personal anecdote, my daughter is a college senior and just entering the job market, and she got a job offer. And we were talking about this week, actually. But her school, her college mandates, if you recruit on her school and you give a job offer, you must give them 10 or 12 weeks to wait. You must. You can't, which I think is really kind and appropriate. I'm glad the school kind of uses their muscle to force that on the employer. Now, these are largely big companies, and it's a slightly different thing, but it lets the kids, and my daughter particularly, kind of look around and see what her landscape is and not take the job out of desperation, right? And take it because it's a bird in the hand. And that's made me more thoughtful about that with people. That being said, I just told you that private practices are pretty inward, and we have a need. We see someone, we want it, we make the offer. We kind of want the answer. I mean, so I've developed a newfound respect for giving that choice, but also don't expect a private practice to really. They're not going to do that. Actually, the truth is they're probably not going to give you 3 months to figure it out because if they want you to be there too, kind of. So. I don't know. Does Kaiser or Santa Clara have a policy on that? Like Fernando, do you know, or Nimish?
We don't have a policy. I mean, I think similar. Once we've identified our top candidate and we want to move forward, we let that candidate know. And we don't necessarily set a strict timeline, but at the same time, like you mentioned, Neil, we don't want to drag out the process so long that if that candidate pulls out, then now we've lost additional candidates, or number 2, number 3, for example. So, I mean, it is definitely we don't want to delay the process, but at the same time, we don't want to strong arm the candidate. We want them to make sure that they want us as much as we want them. And so that typically might mean a couple of weeks, a month or so to kind of make sure that this is the right fit, mutually beneficial to move forward with. And then for us at the Valley, then typically sometimes the paperwork kind of comes on the back end, knowing that there is a commitment from our end that we want to make this hire, and hopefully from the candidate that they intend to accept.
Yeah, I think that the timing is a way of trying to determine how strong the commitment is. I mean, there's a lot of reasons to do it. Number one is there is an opportunity cost. You know, a lot of people, a lot of qualified people, the employer can also lose out if they take too long, because there might be another person that says, you know, are you committing to me? And they're not really sure. The other thing though is that with regard to timing, I mean, there is a certain normal amount of time by which you need to make your decision. And if you're not, you're truly not committed, or you have a couple of places that you're entertaining. And so that, from that perspective, I think that the employer will then kind of move on and say, okay, so you're not really that serious. Doesn't mean you're not interested, but you're not serious. And so then it's time to move on, or you kind of say, okay, we'll just keep looking at other applicants, and at some point that you may decide, and if the job is open, they may take you. But I think the ones where it's just this flash decision, those are probably not the right. That's probably not the right fit, because for anyone it just seems very rushed. If it seems that rushed, like you have to decide in 3 days or a week, you know, I wouldn't encourage that. You'd have to ask yourself why are they rushing? But like Mish said, and Neil, I mean, 3 months is probably way too much.
Right. I don't mean to sound horribly transactional, but this is transactional, right? We can dress it up all we want. It is transactional. People have a need and you have a skill, and we're trying to pair those things up, right? And a little bit kind of depends on the leverage in that transaction. So the daughter I mentioned is a computer science kid, and she has a lot of leverage because they're looking for, she's in demand right now. So she has the leverage to say, give me 12 weeks to wait on that. Right now, as a graduating GI fellow, you don't, I wish you did, I'd love you to, but you don't have a giant amount. There just aren't that many jobs right now. You don't have sort of super dominant leverage right now, and you're not going to be able to, you for sure, like Fernando said, shouldn't be on the spot in 3 days. That's absurd, but you're not going to have 3 months. You're not. No one's going to wait for you that long.
Yeah. Well, we're getting close to time. Looks like so I'm just going to ask one final question. And this is a tough question and you may not be able to answer, but I'm going to go around and everyone will get maybe 30 or so seconds to answer. There are definitely second and third year fellows on the call today, and some of them will be applying for jobs in the next 8-10 months, some in maybe 18 months start looking for jobs. And we know the era now is very uncertain, as many of our panelists have said. For your own practice setting, when do you think that things will get back to normal in terms of expanding or hiring new applicants?
1 year.
Okay, Neil says 1 year. Nimesh?
For us, I think next year.
Next year.
One academic year.
Next academic year. And then what about Fernando?
I mean, I would say getting back to normal is probably a year. But again, we have to remember that normal was really an expansive phase. But obviously between then and now, there is going to be an incremental hiring and need. I think really what a lot of places are doing is they're just kind of reassessing kind of every couple months just to make sure that the finances make sense.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. Especially thank you to our panelists, both the first and second session. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this first webinar. I think it was a great success. Our next webinar, just to advertise a little bit, will be Thursday, November the 12th. November the 12th, Thursday. And this second webinar is also career development focused. This time we'll be focused specifically on people that have changed jobs recently and sort of explore the pros and cons and the decision process of changing job settings. With that, thank you so much, everyone, for taking time out of your evening to join us.
Rob,